It is necessary for the recording of sound to convert the sound waves to corresponding changes in light. The sound waves produced by my voice are transmitted through the air to the microphone, where these sound waves are converted to changes in an electric current. These variations in the electric current are then amplified and used to control the light. This varying beam of light falling on the photoelectric cell produces variations in the electric current, which are directly proportional to the variations in the light beam. The sound track. As the varying electrical current in the photoelectric cell is small, a vacuum tube amplifier is required to increase it to the point where it will operate a loudspeaker. Sound track.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. I got the Headless Giant with me, and I got Lisa. And tonight we will be talking about Long Island, Nazis, and Lyme disease. Real quick, give a quick shout out to my father for this whole episode, because I don't think I would have came across this topic to cover at all, or maybe much later down the road if it wasn't for him. I guess in a sense this topic has kind of been in the making for a while also, because I have spoken to I remember a while ago, one of the first times I think me and Lisa actually started talking is because I had mentioned something about American Horror Story and the ticks and weird stuff with like Lyme disease and AIDS, and how I just thought that season was really weird because it took place on Fire Island, which I remembered had Lyme's disease and ticks and all this and that. So I remember all that stuff from back in the day. So I thought when it was on American Horror Story, it was just weird, and I have mentioned it a few times. And I remember, I think you had hit me up and you were like trying to explain like the whole medical science area about how things didn't make sense about Lyme disease to begin with. If you knew about it, it just, things seemed off. And then I always remember that because, again, like I grew up on Long Island. I remember Lyme's disease. My father ended up getting it. So, I mean, it hit home for me. And as a kid, even before my father having an issue with it, it was just a known thing as a child. Like, oh, you better put spray on. You don't want these ticks. They got Lyme disease now. You know, it was a scare back then for Long Islanders, especially if you lived in wooded areas. So, it was something that I just remember growing up. And one day my father happened to come, stop by recently. He visited. He was out of state. He lives out of state now. And he something, I don't know what made us bring it up. I mean, in my opinion, if you're watching the news or paying attention at all, Nazi shouldn't be a thing that's not in your mind already, because I think you see it quite blatantly in our faces in some ways. And somehow we brought up Nazis, and my dad was just like, yeah, they were like here on Long Island before World War II and after World War II, and they were at Plum Island and doing experiments. And I was like, what? And I was like, yo. And then I'm like, who knows? Because, you always hear like these wild stories. I remember growing up, the crazy stories we'd hear about Plum Island. Things even making the news about stuff washing up on the shore, and they're like, what the hell is this? And then you hear like a lot of just gossip that I guess was considered gossip back then, but as kids, if we think about it now, it was kind of conspiracy. Talking about, oh, did you hear about Plum Island? Did you hear this and that? So I was just like, maybe a lot of what my father was saying may have just been like, lore from back in the day living in Long Island. And I started looking it up, and I was like, yo, as my father would say it, the old man was right. I was like, yo, this guy was actually spot on with everything. And he was even telling me about like Operation Popeye, where I think we wanted to drop like ticks or fleas on somebody else or some shit. And I was like, yo, this stuff is legit. And I started looking into it, and I was like, holy crap, this stuff with the Nazis, Long Island, and Lyme disease is really weird. And I was like, wait, I remember Lisa bringing up Lyme disease. And I was like, I got to show her this. And she was like, yo. And I was like, we got to cover this. This is actually really weird. And it's for me, it's, again, like it hits home because I know of Lyme disease. I remember the scare of it. I remember when it came out and all that stuff, and how big it was on Long Island. and how it may have came to be now is just like, oh, of course, why not? So it's a very special episode for me, and all right, so now we're going to get into it. The Occult Rejects, Lyme disease, Long Island, and Nazis. Everybody knows I love talking about Nazis anyway, so. And so does Headless in some ways, I have noticed. He loves shitting on some Nazis, so.
From time to time,
Yes.
yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, you're good.
Oh,
no, you're good.
Awesome.
And one reason why I do want to preface that, maybe for people who are new listeners or, haven't heard me mention it before, even when it comes to Nazis, I do think it's actually a form of occultism. I think there is that as an underlying factor behind it. So it's kind of another reason why I do like shining the light on them or on that idea or that thing, because I think it goes much farther than just Adolf Hitler, All right, so yeah. All right, so I guess Lisa, we'll let you start it off. We're gonna kind of go into the whole, I guess, scientific aspect and all the stuff with.
We'll briefly touch on Lyme and all that stuff to kind of keep that in the background as we're discussing some of these scientists and these experiments and everything, so that it kind of all starts to fit in together. And so, just really briefly. There was a question that basically kind of started all this off for me, is Lyme disease considered a biowarfare agent? And you can go back and forth and you can say yes or no or whatever. However, here recently, and I say recently in 2005, so the CDC government has denied for years that Lyme disease was a bioagent, right? But in November of 2005, they opened a brand new 22,000 square foot facility in Texas, San Antonio, Texas, that was going to be used to study certain diseases such as anthrax, tularemia, cholera, Lyme disease, desert valley fever, and other parasitic fungal diseases that were considered potential bioterrorism agents. So indirectly, they're kind of saying Lyme disease is a bioterroristic agent. So at that point, you're kind of like, well, why are you investigating if it's not, right? So why are you spending so much money? So to give a little history, I don't know if you want to pull up the slide that says Lyme disease, just to kind of give a little visual. So a little brief history on Lyme disease. So Lyme disease was discovered in the mid-1970s, and it was due to an outbreak that initially was labeled juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. So in July of 1975, mothers started to notice that their children were showing strange mental and physiological symptoms. And as the story goes, the mothers got on the phone, they started calling other mothers, asking if their children were having the same symptoms and what was going on. Some of these symptoms included skin rashes, throbbing headaches, painful swollen joints, into so much the point that these mothers went to the Department of Health for Connecticut and filed complaints because of this new thing that started to happen with their children. So the Department of Health employed doctors from Yale, and they started to investigate, and those doctors ended up calling it juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, and more specifically, Lyme arthritis. And Lyme arthritis would then be diagnosed in 39 children and 12 adults of this local area. So to this day, experts can't even answer why the disease suddenly came on surface in Old Lyme, Connecticut in the summer in July of 1975. So just brand new, kind of came out from nowhere and hit Old Lyme and Lyme in this area pretty hard.
I even remember that back in the day, and I was even, talking to my father not too long ago about Lyme's disease because we were reading it, going through it. And he was even saying, like, back in the day, it was like neither you lived in Connecticut or Long Island. That was the only way you were getting it at first.
Yeah, no, and it's true. So you see, so if you go into the historical geography, you see the geocluster around Plum Island. And so it's mainly in the in the southeast towns of Connecticut, and then all along Long Island, or the northern eastern parts of Long Island. So that's how the disease got its name, from Lyme and Old Lyme, Connecticut, the towns. So Lyme and Old Lyme lie directly across and just north of Plum Island. And Plum Island is now, and we'll discuss further, is the government animal and disease research facility that's kind of been an establishment since the 1950s, officially. So it was first used as Fort Terry, like an artillery type situation, and then it was quickly transitioned over to a military biological warfare research facility, and then it was into a government public research facility. And this is exactly where, and we'll talk about him later, Eric Traub did most of his experiments on more than 40 plus lethal viruses on large animals. So the earliest known American case of Lyme happens in the 1960s around this area. So if you say, okay, well, Lyme is endemic to this area, there was a case in 1960, Eric Traub was already there. He was already experimenting. So it's not like, it's prior to. The distance between Plum Island and Connecticut, so people say, well, how can it happen if, Plum Island's all the way over here, Connecticut's over here? Plum Island sits about 17 miles from Lyme and 10 miles from Old Lyme. And that's according to Wikipedia. Some people say more or less, but the common distance is 17 miles from Lyme and 10 miles from Old Lyme. And so 17, I thought that was
of course. You got to get a 17 in there.
Of course. And then 30 miles from Yaphank. So, that's
going to be interesting.
That's also another thing. And so the other thing with these facilities on Plum Island, they were doing the experiments with large animals in open pens outdoors. So anytime you have a situation like that, you kind of leave yourself open to birds coming in, rummaging through feces, kind of grooming in with large animals. You also have the situation of deer swimming. I know that in Florida, whenever I worked down there, you saw deer swimming. They swim anywhere up to like 4 to 5 miles easily. So if they're going back and forth, that's also another way that the ticks can travel if they escape, right? And if you're testing them on large animals, who's to say that they don't drop in the open pen facility and scurry around with rodents or birds or deer? So
that was actually one of the reasons or excuses we were told from how deer got, how the ticks got from Fire Island to Long Island. From the deer.
It's very plausible. Yes, absolutely. But, and going into it, and we'll discuss it, they don't affect deer. So deer are totally cool with Lyme disease. It only affects humans for some weird reason.
Well, I just wanted to pop here in 1 minute. In 2007, the UK actually had a hoof and mouth outbreak from their infectious research laboratory. And it was the same exact situation. They put the infectious research laboratory in the middle of all of these large animals, and then it just spread all throughout everybody. So this is not unprecedented. These scientists are very, very bad at containing their experiments, as we've seen over and over and over again.
Unofficially, I know that for a fact. They, for some reason,
They just can't contain it. I don't know what it is.
They like these open door facilities. It's kind of weird.
They like the sun in their eyes and on their face.
They want to give them a realistic effect. Yeah. They feel so bad for the test animals. So that's kind of the origin story, so to speak, in that, people came down with Lyme disease in Connecticut. Scientists found the causative agent, and it was a spirochete transmitted by a black-legged tick, and that all you have to do is just take a short course of antibiotics, mystery solved, problem fixed. And that's the script that is followed by health officials, researchers, and the medical establishment completely. But the problem with Lyme disease, and I think this is why they picked it, is that it masks itself and it's known as the great imitator, in that the symptoms of Lyme disease, basically, it mirrors other diseases such as Alzheimer's, arthritis, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, lupus, multiple sclerosis, and later onset of arthritis. And so the symptoms are everything from joint pain, abdominal pain, confusion, fever, chills, dizziness, and the list goes on and on, from difficulty concentrating to short-term memory loss. I mean, it could be anything. So it's so difficult to say, oh, it's actually this. It's a classic symptom of Lyme. This has to be it or whatever. So reporting it it's one of those things to where you have to go to an actual physician. The physician has to say, yes, it is, based on whatever checklist he has. Granted, going back to the whole, the medical establishment of what their, curriculum is based off of. And then it's just kind of like a guessing game from there on. So Lyme, go ahead.
If you look at that documentary that's right in the middle of the slide here, the Under Our Skin documentary talks about that specifically. They talk about how difficult it is to get these doctors to actually look at chronic Lyme disease.
Yes.
And they will actually call a person crazy and say that it's all in their mind, right?
Yeah.
But what's interesting about the spirochete bacteria is there's another very prominent spirochete bacteria that has a lot of the same sort of symptoms.
Syphilis.
That's syphilis. That's right.
Yeah.
So a guy like Eric Traub would be working with something like syphilis and saying, hey, maybe I could put this into ticks.
Correct.
And then you get Lyme disease.
Absolutely, Headless. What you were saying about the whole syphilis and how it's so smart, I think, in that how it evades everything of detection and then treatment. So, and then what you were saying about with the doctors, it takes people to go out of pocket, and after it's common to go up to 10 doctors for them to finally say, okay, you do have Lyme disease. And even if they do the Lyme disease, you have to go through a series of tests. Like, it's a 2-tier test. One is an ELISA for detection, and then the other one is a Western blot for confirmation. And the tests themselves, they only test antibodies, which is considered an indirect test. They're not even testing for the virus itself. They're only testing to see if you have the antibodies to the virus itself. And those actual tests are not even specific. They're only for rickettsial diseases. They're not for specifically that type of spirochete, from what I understand. And then going further, even with those 2 tiers, they're highly insensitive. I mean, I think they said it's over 50% of the people that are diagnosed. That it's over like half of the people who say they have Lyme, they tell them they don't have Lyme. I mean, that's a lot. 50% is a lot.
Right.
So, and I think I went on a quick rant when we were discussing this, and why that you have all of this money being spent for whatever it is, military, aeronautics, communication, intelligence, and
Ukraine.
Ukraine, and you can't even get a viable test to confirm Lyme disease. Forget the treatment, just get the test. So it's almost like they're avoiding it completely. And then, of course, with the medical establishment completely calling people crazy. And I have an uncle that tested positive for Lyme disease finally, and it was the same thing. It was the runaround of the mill, and no, you don't have it, blah, blah, blah. So it's emotionally, I think it's also a struggle for people who have Lyme disease. So, but yeah, right. And then
I think also you have to look at that list of other symptoms. Mm-hmm. Right? And so they've got a whole lot of drugs that they'd love to push onto you if you've got all those other symptoms. And so thinking that it's Lyme disease and that could knock it out, that could really cut into the pharmaceutical company's profits.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the course of what treatment is like antibiotics, some people say it works, some people say it doesn't.
Right. Well, it's often the highest doses that really cause it to get knocked out. And the problem with the high dose is that now doctors, this has become very popular in the medical establishment, to say that we're overdiagnosing antibiotics. And in overdiagnosing antibiotics, the first people that they take aim at are the victims of the Lyme disease testing. So they've actually targeted doctors who prescribe massive amounts of antibiotics. Now, it's not good for your body to get massive amounts of antibiotics, but it will knock out the Lyme disease. So you've got to make that, clinical call. But they want to attack the clinicians that actually go after Lyme disease because they'd much rather have it be psychosomatic. They'd much rather have that.
And I think it's also insurance. You have to go off of your insurance and find a doctor that's off of your insurance to even get someone to look at you and give you treatment, from what I've read online. So I don't know if there's also collusion with that as well. So.
Oh, big time. Yeah. There's always government actors going into insurance companies telling them what they can and can't fund. There's no free market when it comes to insurance at all,
No,
ever.
not at all. So one thing I found, I think, and why you'll find this interesting. So like I went to the CDC to see what they say, and each year 30,000 cases of Lyme disease are reported. Okay, so you have the 3 again. And this is based on the national standard of surveillance, which differs from the actual local and state. And with local and state, that puts the estimate at 300,000 people that are diagnosed with Lyme each year. And it's kind of like, wow, that's like a lot of variation. But then
It's
you
only
see
10%.
the threes.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
30,000, 300,000.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what was the other thing 30 miles away?
From Pank. Yeah. And so so there's that. And then here's another one. In 2005, it's the 6th most common disease and number 1 common tick-borne disease. And in 2017, there was a 17% increase from 2016. And for some reason, after 2017, the numbers just are not there. They blame COVID, even though COVID happened in 2020, but everything's kind of, skeptical at that point.
Wow.
One thing I
Interesting
did
numbers.
find interesting was that, so the Borrelia or borreliosis of Lyme, the highest frequencies in Europe are found in Germany, Austria, Slovenia, and Sweden, in that their incidence of disease is equal to that of Lyme, Connecticut. So, I mean, I don't know, it seems a little coincidental. So the spirochete itself, it's similar to syphilis. It has a corkscrew shape. It's sine wave. It can evade all kinds of detection or immune reaction or anything like that. One thing that I found was interesting is that it has lengths between 3 to 500 micrometers and then a diameter of 0.09 to 3 micrometers. So that's like 93. I thought that was interesting. So because of the way that it can evade things, it can easily cross the blood-brain barrier. It can burrow itself into the brain and then gain, very easy access into your central nervous system. Hence why some of these patients have the whole complaints of, nervous system, and they have palsy, they have all kinds of neurological stuff.
Almost
going
like feels
on.
like arthritis and stuff too that I've heard.
Yeah. So the actual pathway on that is, so once the spirochete hatches, it goes into the smallest stage, which is your larval stage. And the larval stage and the nymph stage they require a blood meal, and they will take a blood meal from mice, squirrels, and shrews and other small invertebrates. Now, the vertebrates themselves have to be infected in order to infect the tick. According to the literature, and this is according to the literature, is that the tick only becomes infected with Lyme when it takes the blood meal from the small mammals and gets infected from the small mammals. So that Lyme naturally occurs in small mammals and infects the tick. That is what the official literature says.
Okay.
And then once it molts and grows into an adult, it will hop onto a deer in order to maintain its blood supply and grow so that it can reproduce and lay eggs. And with deer, when it bites deer, and if it is infected, it does not affect deer. For some reason, deer are not fazed by Lyme disease. The problem is that when it crawls onto a human, bites a human, then it infects it with Lyme disease. And the worst part about it is that, so we talked about a little bit about the spirochete. With the tick itself, when the tick bites a human, it also inserts 2 things: a glue that basically allows it to attach to the skin itself, but then also it has salivary proteins that decrease immune function. So those salivary proteins will attach to the spirochete, and that spirochete will just automatically, it already evades immune response, but with those salivary proteins attached to it, it's like, in camo, pretty much throughout. And so that's why it takes off so badly. So it almost seems like it was destined, like a fate destined, in that the spirochete's great at evading, and then the salivary proteins of the tick itself also help in evading.
It's very stealthy.
Detection.
Very stealthy.
Destined or designed? That sounds like a very
it's big a designer drug.
Right.
I think it's designed, but So yeah, that's a big one. And then, so the black-legged tick is your primary vector, and that is only found on the East Coast. Now, you're seeing other ticks kind of take over the area and so forth, and they're claiming that there are other ticks becoming infected with Lyme. Now, when I was in school and in the literature, they always say, no, these other ticks cannot carry Lyme disease, that these spirochetes are specific to specific species of ticks, and only certain ticks carry certain ones, and only these carry that, and so forth. However, now you're starting to see in the literature ticks being infected with like 10 different viruses. That was never taught to us. It was always species specific. This one carries this one carries that, and then no crossing over. That's not true anymore. Now, I don't know if that is on purpose or if that is because it was designed that way. So there's that now in the works. So going back to ticks, spirochetes, the tick itself is the perfect germ vector, or rather, historically, it has long been used as a germ weapon or the germ weapon of choice by Nazi Germany, Empire Japan, and Soviet Union in the US. So that's pretty much kind of why I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the spirochete and then the tick itself.
You got anything else?
Well, I don't know, Headless, you want to talk about any?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the occurrence of the vector-borne diseases throughout history and throughout mythology. And the one that comes to mind the most is the gadfly in Greek mythology. You'll find the gadfly is always used by the gods and sent out to go take out rebellious or people that they have issue with, right? So what you find in mythology is this character called Bellerophon. And Bellerophon was a Greek hero who actually fought against the Chimera. And it's funny because in the second Mission Impossible movie, you see that they've got this Bellerophon vaccine for a Chimera virus. Now, it's kind of funny that they would use that Chimera virus, because what are we looking at with COVID now? So they've got this Chimera virus, and the only way to cure it is with Bellerophon. In Greek mythology, Bellerophon is the hero that actually killed the Chimera, right? But he also went on from there to have several other adventures, and he kept being compared. They kept asking, is this guy the son of Poseidon? Is he the son of these gods? And he was pissed because it was all him. He was just a human. He wasn't actually related to these people. And so he decided to ride Pegasus up to Mount Olympus to try and take on the gods. He's going to say, I'll show them I'm not lesser than these gods. I'm not descended from them. I'm better than them. So as he's riding up to Mount Olympus, Zeus decides to send the gadfly. And gadfly is interesting because they say, well, in the original language, they're talking about a prod, right? So anytime you've got a biting insect, they would be considered a gadfly. So ticks would be a gadfly, horseflies, all the rest of that. They would all be considered these gadflies, right? And so once he gets basically afflicted with this gadfly, he falls off of Pegasus and dies, right? So this is what you get when you go up against the gods. If you're rebellious, they will send their gadflies to you, and you will be killed by them. There's another goddess, Io, who is also considered to be like the cow goddess. So she went to Egypt. Io, yeah, one of the moons of Jupiter. So Jupiter, or Zeus, he was banging Io, and Hera did not like that, so she sent the gadfly to afflict this cow goddess. Now, she's also very, very closely related to the Isis form, right, with the cow head. So Io and that Isis form with the cow head are very, very closely related. But it's also interesting. She was also in the play Prometheus Bound. And as she's trying to talk to Prometheus, she's being tortured by this gadfly that Hera sent after her. So there's a lot of interesting dialogue in that play between the two. But we see all throughout history these cults that are very, very closely related with the eagle. I like to call them the eagle cults, right? And so the Nazis are an eagle cult. America's an eagle cult. You see the eagle cults all throughout history, and they're always associated with warfare based around using these biological vectors, especially ticks. And look at the big, the Great Plague. That was caused by fleas, apparently, right? And so we've always got these vector-borne diseases that are being spread around by these empires who closely associate with the throne of heaven or the eagle, because the eagle is always the servant of the throne of heaven. So whether it's Kronos before Zeus, or Zeus himself, or Uranus before Saturn, before Kronos, they always have the eagle associated with them. And what do we have today on our flags, on everything? It's the eagle. That is always associated with the throne of heaven. And the throne of heaven is always sending out their gadflies. And it's really funny. We share a lot of the same symbolism as Nazi Germany. If you go into the Capitol building, you'll see fasci all over the drapes, right? You'll see
right on the wall.
All sorts of, right. And we've got the Nazi eagle. And originally, the Nazi salute came from America. That was actually a Christian socialist conception. And you were supposed to salute the flag using the Nazi salute. That was called the Bellamy salute, right? So all of these cultures and civilizations have huge crossovers when it comes to this eagle cult. And again, they took Eric Traub over with this Operation Paperclip because the funding source for the Nazis is the same as the funding source for the American Empire, especially in World War II. And so the idea there is that the gadfly can be used on all the rebellious populations of the world. So they're going to release all of these ticks all over the place. It's going to lower the health and well-being of these populations that might get a little bit, uppity. And it's so funny that they would happen always associated with this throne of heaven cult that always associates itself with the eagle. Now, I live around eagles. I've never seen so many eagles out here. I mean, out in Wisconsin, we've got eagles coming out the hoo-ha. I don't know why they say that they're endangered. They're everywhere. And they feast all over the carcasses of these deers that are crawling with ticks, like on the side of the road. These things are crawling with ticks, and then the eagles get infected with the ticks, and who knows where they're bringing it. Right. But now the big focus that they're going to, again, we're too rebellious. Right. What they want to do. I saw this in a World Economic Forum speech. This guy gets up there and talks about alpha gal, and alpha gal will make you allergic to red meat. And what do they spread alpha gal with? Oh, it's the ticks again. Anytime we get too rebellious, they're always coming in with these ticks or whatever vector-borne diseases that they've sort of engineered by trial and error. They don't care if they lose anybody in the process. So as they're figuring out how to throw corpses over the walls back in the medieval period to give everybody diseases back then, what happened to the people who were throwing them? What happened to the guys manning the catapults? You think they were okay? No, they died too. So the whole idea there is that they're using this sort of ambient warfare or biological warfare state to take everybody down just one notch at a time to make us more compliant. If we're feeling healthy, if we're feeling well treated, we might actually start to question the people who are taking, 30 to 40% of our money every year, So the idea there is that the Bellerophon must be taken down, and the best way to do that is to send the gadfly. It's funny, gad, if you've ever heard the term egads, right? That's also associated with the gods. So instead of saying ye gods, you say ye gads, and that was an old-fashioned term, and they're talking about this as if it's a god fly, right? So it's not just this prod, it's also this force of heaven, or the force of the people in charge can get to sort of decide who they can afflict with all this stuff. And you also see that in Apollo too. He's the god of music and also the god of pestilence. So if you've got a huge outbreak of diseases, they'll pray to Apollo to lift the disease vector that's afflicting them. Again, it's always associated with these gods. It's not just demons, right? You'll hear that a lot. Well, maybe all these diseases, which, now the new thing in conspiracy circles is maybe viruses don't exist and maybe it's actually demon possession. Well, I'm not completely opposed to that. The spirochete bacteria will attack the weakest areas in your body, correct, right? And so the idea there is that if you've been putting stress on a certain part of your body, or if you've been going through a lot of, oxidative stress, it's going to be so much easier for that spirochete bacteria to burrow itself in there. So what's the difference between a demon who is going to take advantage of your weaknesses and these spirochete bacteria? For a human being who doesn't have a microscope, there's not really much of a difference there.
No. Right.
So the effect is the same.
And then, of course,
it's a different
with the
avenue
diet
of doing
and everything. Yeah, no, with the diet and not, not being active and stuff like that, you're almost weakening the population in and of itself. So, I mean, you're rendering yourself weak as it is. So, yeah. But just real quickly, going back to how the military would use insects. Yeah, I mean, it isn't, like I had mentioned earlier, Nazi Germany, Japan was notorious for using insects, and all of that got scrubbed. And apparently what happened was that when they heard that the Nuremberg trials were going on, or that they had heard that they were collecting all these scientists, Japan burned all of its records. And so there's very little information out there on Japan's, experiments with biowarfare. But apparently they were doing the same thing that the Nazis were doing on Ensil Reims. So that's another one.
Oh, well, Unit 731 was off the hook, and nobody ever hears about that.
Correct. And they
nobody except for people that escaped, nobody came out of there alive. Right. If you went in there, you were there and studied until you died. You were not supposed to leave.
Yeah. They wanted to be the world's leading bioweapons laboratory. That's what they were selling themselves on, the Unit 731. So with Plum Island, Operation Paperclip comes into play. And so that's where you have all of the sequestering of these scientists coming over. And one of them was Eric Traub, like you had mentioned. So he would just really briefly, he was the lab director, rather, at Ensil Reims in Nazi Germany during World War II. And he was tasked to basically research biological warfare for Nazi Germany. And he worked directly under Heinrich Himmler, which was Hitler's number 2. And he was charged for looking at the virus and weaponizing the virus that was going to be sprayed from planes over Russia. So that was one of his roles in Nazi Germany. And the other one, that he was also the authority of viruses and diseases in Germany and all of Europe, or at least that's what he was known as, and that's why. And I believe that he was on, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe he was on the east side of the curtain. And so when Russia came over, they were forcing him to do experiments, and he somehow escaped and applied for Operation Paperclip, and then was taken in. That's some of what the literature was saying. I don't know
how when it comes to that sort of thing, the East had more CIA agents than in Langley. So what they had was a pipeline of people that they could get out at a moment's notice. That was sort of their thing, is like anybody who was desperate enough to be, stuck in that situation and had any sort of value, the CIA would immediately snatch them up and take them back over across.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. So he comes over, and one of the main things they want him looking at is foot and mouth disease. So that's what they have on record. But there's other records stating that he was researching over 40 plus diseases in large animals, and specifically lethal diseases that would affect livestock. And so that's pretty much everything's kind of been scrubbed. I think it's Project 63, if I'm not mistaken, that was aimed at protecting and scrubbing all record of the scientists that came over on Operation Paperclip, and then any kind of work that they did for the government was concealed. So there's been several books that have come out about Eric Traub, and so I mean the list is long. I don't know if you want to get into pre-World War II of Eric Traub.
Yeah, I have some stuff on Plum Island and Eric Traub that I'll read that off, and then we'll go from there and see what you want to do.
Okay.
Plum Island, in case people don't even know what that is, a Plum Island, and there's a Plum Island Animal Disease Center, which is on Plum Island. Plum Island Animal Disease Center is a United States federal research facility dedicated to the study of foreign animal diseases of livestock. It is a national laboratory of the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, and operates as a partnership with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Isolated on Plum Island off the eastern tip of Long Island, New York, the center has been tasked with protecting America's livestock from animal diseases since 1954. I just wonder. It's like, is it under the guise of protecting us? I mean, I don't know. Is that the reason why you're doing it? Just seems like an excuse. I don't know. It is the only facility in the country authorized to work with live foot and mouth disease and African swine fever. It was then staffed by at least 9 military and 8 civilian employees, which you'll get 17 again. At the height of the Cold War, a study of biological weapons for use against livestock was conducted at the site, ending in 1969 when President Nixon declared an end to the United States offensive bioweapons program. Today, the facility maintains laboratories up to biosafety level 3 and has remained controversial as a result of its high-risk work and proximity to the New York metropolitan area. The facility is slated for closure in 2023. I mean, it's 2023 right now, but they are supposedly also moving it to Manhattan, Kansas. I even find that weird, how it's like leaving New York but going to a place, Manhattan, in Kansas.
Well, it's what's even weirder is that they're researching diseases in livestock, and you're taking a facility to the center of livestock ranching
like
and
England.
farming. Yeah. I mean, and then they're notorious for having these open laboratories. Like, it just, yeah, it's a little much.
I think that's what's causing the delay, because they keep saying that they're going to close it. And Kansas keeps saying, what are you going to do to our livestock? We know the history. And so it's like they keep pushing it back year after year. But, you're not going to get the government to ever change their plans. They need Manhattan, Kansas. They need this reflective area. I don't know who these people think they're kidding, I mean, all of these symbols add up to a very, very specific picture. They want to hurt people. This is, it couldn't be any more obvious at this point. Look at the new EG5 variant, Eris. Why are you calling it Eris? Eris is the goddess of discord and chaos. She's the one who basically sparked the Trojan War. And what are we looking right now with the East meets West conflict? Now we've got Russia. Well, let's say it's a bioweapon against Russia. What better way to throw that apple of discord? I almost don't want to say it because it's so obvious, The new EG5 variant of COVID is going to be the apple of discord between us and gets us into a hot war. It's so obvious,
Right.
Yeah. So what do you have, Lisa, that you want to do? Like, I do have that German-American bond.
Yeah, remember we were discussing about how Eric was in New York prior to World War II?
Yes. Yeah, if you want to go into that.
Okay, so there's I believe it's slide number 3 or 4. I'm not sure that it has there you go. So Eric Traub did an actual or had a fellowship to go to Rockefeller University there in New York, and he did a fellowship with Rockefeller and was there for several years, and he published several papers indicating his work there with Rockefeller University, and it was centrally focused on vaccines and viruses. And so he was there, according to the publications, he was there from 35 and potentially all the way from 1935 to 1938. So that's interesting that, he was here, he was active in the research field with vaccines and viruses, and I believe he was also active in other forms of political belief systems at the same time. So, but that's, yeah, and I believe, and he was, I believe, living in Yaphank.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And that's going to bring us to stuff in Yaphank and Nazis that I had no idea about. I was like, what? So, yeah, that brings us to the German-American Federation, or German-American Bund. The German-American Federation was a German-American Nazi organization which established in 1936 as a successor to the Friends of New Germany, also called FONG or FDND in German. The organization chose its new name in order to emphasize its American credentials after the press accused it of being unpatriotic. The Bund was allowed to consist only of American citizens of German descent. Its main goal was to promote a favorable view of Nazi Germany. In May of 1993, Nazi Deputy Führer in May of 1933, Nazi Deputy Rudolf Hess gave German immigrant and German Nazi Party member Spengnoble authority to form an American Nazi organization. And shortly after that, with the help from the German Council in New York City, he created the Friends of New Germany by merging two older organizations in the United States. The United States GAU, it was GAU-USA, that was one of the organizations, and the Free Society of Teutonia, if I'm saying that correctly, which were both small groups with only a few hundred members each. Real quick, I just found this a little bit interesting to mention. The Free Society of Teutonia was formed in 1924 by 4 German immigrants, including brothers Fritz, Peter, and Andrew. Both Fritz and Peter were reportedly members of the Nazi Party. The organization was originally led by Fritz, a non-citizen, from headquarters in Chicago. The society set about recruiting ethnic Germans who supported right-wing German nationalism. It was also one of the earliest Nazi organizations in the United States. It was officially a German-American organization, but also publicly expressed a strong support for Nazi Germany and Nazism in general. The group accepted Hitler as its leader, and members adopted the Nazi salute. The society changed its name again in October of 1932 to become the Friends of Hitler movement. So these things were here prior to World War II. The FONG was based in New York City, but had a strong presence in Chicago. Male members wore a uniform, a white shirt, black trousers, and a black hat adorned with a red symbol. Female members wore a white blouse and a black skirt. The organization was openly pro-Nazi, and it engaged in activities such as storming the German language New Yorker, demanding that it publish pro-Nazi articles. They would infiltrate other non-political German-American organizations. One of the Friends' early initiatives was to use propaganda to counter the Jewish boycott of German goods, which was started in March of 1933 as a protest against Nazi anti-Semitism. The organization existed into the mid-1930s, although it always remained small, with a membership of between 5 and 10,000, mostly consisting of German citizens who were living in the United States and German immigrants who had only recently become citizens. In December of 1935, Rudolf Hess ordered all German citizens to leave the FONG, and all of its leaders were recalled to Germany. The Bund establishment a number of training camps, including Camp Nordland in Sussex County, New Jersey, Camp Siegfried in Yaphank, New York, Camp Hindenburg in Grafton, Wisconsin, and there was one in Sellersville, Pennsylvania, and there was another one in Bloomingdale, New Jersey, and Windham, New York. The Bund held rallies with Nazi insignia and procedures such as the Hitler salute, and attacked the administration of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, Jewish American groups, communism, and Moscow-directed trade unions, and American boycotts of German goods. The organization claimed to show its loyalty to America by displaying the flag of the United States alongside the flag of Nazi Germany at Bund meetings. And the reason for this is that they declared that George Washington was the first fascist who did not believe democracy would work. Interesting. Anti-Semitic and pro-Nazi elements in the United States generally supported the Bund. The Bund included self-designated stormtroopers who wore the uniforms of the German Nazi SA. Mass rallies were held at such sites at Madison Square Garden in New York City. In 1939, the Bund's total membership was about 20,000. Camp Siegfried was a summer camp which taught Nazis, and now this is the one in Yaphank, Long Island. Camp Siegfried was a summer camp which taught Nazi ideology. It was located in Yaphank, New York on Long Island. It was owned by the German-American Bund, an American Nazi organization devoted to promoting a favorable view of Nazi Germany. Camp Siegfried had a pool, archery competitions, hikes through the woods, a youth camp on the other side of the upper lake, Oompa bands, and Oktoberfest celebrations. Women in German peasant outfits greeted visitors at the gate. Weekend morning Long Island Railroad trains called Camp Siegfried Specials ran from Penn Station in New York City to Yaphank for the convenience of the camp's guests. That is impressive that you had that many people interested. You have your own little line going from Penn Station to a Nazi camp. To me, I mean, I don't know. That sounds impressive to me. In 1938, the New York Times reported that 40,000 people attended that year's annual German Day festivities.
That's a lot of people.
By 1935, Hitler supplied Camp Siegfried with teachers and German philosophy textbooks and smuggled them in uniforms. Yaphank youth were taken on trips to Germany, including a 1936 trip to the Olympics. The fucking school ain't go to the Olympics. Where Hitler urged to maintain the Kampf, the struggle in the States. By 1937, pro-Nazi sympathizers occupied German garden bungalows on Adolf Hitler Street. This is in Yaphank, Long Island. On the streets named after Hitler's head honchos. So he had, there was names of other people that were in there. Embedded in the houses, brickwork was swastikas, fascist symbols, and of severe economic regimentation and forcible suppression of opposition. Residents drank beer with local political activists and gun enthusiasts. Camp Siegfried also had Nazi and Hitler youth flags displayed on the grounds, along with pictures of Adolf Hitler, and men were photographed there in Italian fascist-style black shirts and SA-style brown shirts, and Nazi military uniform. According to a court case brought against the German-American Settlement League in 1938 for failing to register with New York Secretary of State to become a member of the League, one had to swear allegiance to Hitler and to the leaders of the German-American Bund. During the trial, a witness was asked to demonstrate how those at the camp saluted the American flag. He responded by giving the Nazi salute. When asked if this was the American salute, the witness responded, "It will be." According to the Washington Post, the purpose of Camp Siegfried was to raise the future leaders of America and make sure they were steeped in Nazi ideals. These future Aryan leaders were not only forced to physically build the camp's infrastructure, but were also coerced into having sex with each other in order to breed a generation of perfect Aryan children. Camp Siegfried was transformed into German Gardens, a planned community which had been approved by the town of Brookhaven in 1936. Located along Upper Lake, part of German Gardens, where streets named after Hitler, Joseph Goebbels, and Hermann Göring were not changed until 1941. And that's when Yaphank took it over, supposedly. Was later absorbed by Yaphank, while the remainder became Siegfried Park, a 40-acre private community of small bungalows and suburban-type ranch houses with well-kept lawns, where the land under the houses was owned by the German-American Settlement League, and no one could buy a house without being approved by the League. Technically a co-op, the League's bylaws included a restrictive covenant that all home buyers had to be mostly of German, descent. Eventually, supposedly in 2016, 2016, there was a lawsuit, and then in May of 2017, that had to come to an end. It was discriminatory. So up until 2017, in Yaphank, this little 40-acre place, you were not getting in unless you were German and probably a fucking Nazi. That's come on, that is wild.
I'd like to throw in a couple of cents there. So, like I was saying about the Bellamy salute. So, Francis Bellamy first described the Nazi salute in 1892. Way before the Nazis. And he also wrote the Pledge of Allegiance. So this guy was not some small guy. He was the guy who wrote the Pledge of Allegiance. And you were supposed to say the Pledge of Allegiance with the arm out. So the idea there is that we kind of created Nazi Germany. We gave them the Bellamy salute, and they called it the Hitler salute. So when they're talking about what's the salute to the flag, well, yeah, that's Francis Bellamy's salute. That's the one he came up with. So in a lot of ways, what they're doing there is they're German baiting. So all throughout the late 18th century, there was a fascination with Germany all across America. Most of the immigrants to the middle of the country were German in nature. And then once World War II struck out, they made the speaking of German illegal. So we're talking about all these German immigrants and all these German people who had, I mean, I don't know about you, but there's always a Germantown road in your area because there were Germans everywhere, right? Yeah. And so the idea that they would be so up in arms about these people, well, we adopted Prussian education. We gave them the eugenicist scientists from the same institution that Eric Traub was, studying at. And so I think one of the reasons why they want to get rid of Nazism so badly is to wipe their own history clean, right? If they can get rid of the whole idea of Nazism, then they can say, well, we were never those guys. But the fact of the matter is there was a very mutual relationship between America and Germany. I mean, we've got Prussian education to this day. And a lot of the way that we expanded the empire was because of the German nationalist ideal that they brought over here. And we gave them all of that eugenicist stuff. So really, if they get rid of the Nazis, all they're doing is just erasing the implication that America was complicit, not just complicit, but eager to engage with this. But, Germany was courting America in the same way that England was. And England just had the harder sell, which was the world wars. And you've got to get involved in the world wars. You've got to come to the aid of England. And England always had this sort of rivalry with Germany because Germany was closer to Russia. And if Germany and Russia could get it together and actually become friends, that would leave England completely out of everything, because that's all of island Asia, or Europe and Asia together, because Russia has the most amount of landmass of any other country. If they could combine the German engineering skill with the Russian production of resources, that would be it for English control. And this is why we've always seen, this is what we're going through today, is England doesn't want Russia to be friends with Ukraine, and we've got to fund the war effort over there. And so the idea that German scientists would come over to America is just natural because they had such a long relationship. And if you think about the name Operation Paperclip, that's tying two pieces of paper together. So two file folders that are basically concurrent with one another. You just put the paperclip on them, and then it's all one file. Right? That's all they're talking about, is just combining the personality files. So, to me, I'm not surprised that they would have camps all over the U.S. because we basically created Nazi Germany. They took a lot of symbolism from us. We took a lot of symbolism from them. So obviously there would be that kind of a relationship there, and it would be brought to a head considering the fact that, basically they made it illegal to be German after World War I, and so there would be a lot of people who were still upset about that during World War II, but they weren't allowed to voice their opinions politically because they would get immediately shut out. Again, look at how crazy they are about right-wing populism. Right-wing populism is Nazism. Well, that's just them trying to erase the fact that they were built by the Nazis. They don't want to talk about it. And so, again, like all these camps and stuff, America invented the Boy Scouts, and then the Boy Scouts went over to Germany and became the Brown Shirts. That's where they got their ideas of the Boy Scouts from, is from America. And what they did with the Hitler Youth over there, that was the American invention, because we were doing the same thing with the Boy Scouts. To this day, if you are an Eagle Scout, you go up 2 ranks when you join the military. I thought the Boy Scouts was supposed to be a private organization.
Yeah.
Right.
I didn't know it was linked to the military.
No, that's bugged out.
Absolutely it is.
I had no idea.
In the same way that the Brown Shirts and the Nazi youth were very connected with Hitler's military. He just borrowed the concept from us.
Yeah. Well, the more you look at it, I'm thinking, how did they just overlook that Eric Traub was part of Camp Siegfried? Did they just find it convenient? And, but then like with what you're saying, and then they were far more advanced in their research. I mean, it was by default that we would have to bring them over in order to be competitive. And that's just with Eric Traub that I've looked in. And you hear the talk about, Erich von Braun or Werner von Braun, sorry, and the aeronautic. We had no choice. They were, and then the relationship was already there, like with Eric and his relationship with Rockefeller University. So.
Oh yeah, and that was in New York. Or at least it is there now.
George Bush's grandfather with Brown Brothers Harriman got a letter from the FBI saying, you need to stop funding the Nazis. They were heavily embedded with the Nazis. There was no separation between the two. I think that the Nazis thought that if they just went 1 or 2 steps further than America was going at the time, that America would be like, yes, that's exactly what we want. There was a large contingent of anti-Semitism in the United States at World War I on the behest of the political ruling elite, because they thought that the Jews would not join the U.S. military based off of their national identity, right? And so that carried over into Germany as well. It's like, well, we don't like them. They're internationalists. They're not part of our union, which is exactly what America was saying during World War One. There's a continuity across these oceans.
I think, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say real quick, and then I know it's like because we still have like Plum Island and Fort Terry to get to. But I was going to say real quick, I did want to cover a spy raid that also happened on Long Island with Nazis. Real quick, and then we can move back on. Yeah. So there was even a spy raid. In here, I think I say over 30, but when I looked it up, funny thing, it happened to be on the newspapers. It said 33. So, who knows now? Who knows what really happened? But there was supposedly a raid on a Saturday morning of June 28th, 1941. FBI agents and local law enforcement raided the home of Everett Roeder of 210 Smith Street. Everett Roeder was escorted from his house in handcuffs. Neighbors described him as very quiet, rarely speaking to anyone outside of brief pleasantries. Roeder, he was a mechanical engineer at Sperry Gyroscope Company, and he worked on projects that included bomb sites for planes. Now, real quick, I'm just going to go into Sperry Gyroscope. I have 2 paragraphs, and I think it's just real interesting how, before I even get into the rest of what happened with this raid, they're telling you that they busted a dude that worked at this place, and I wanted to see what it was about. During the 1950s, a large part of Sperry Gyroscope moved to Phoenix, Arizona, and soon became the Sperry Flight Systems Company. This was to preserve parts of this defense company in the event of a nuclear war. The Gyroscope Division remained headquarters in New York in its massive Lake Success, Long Island plant. So again, it's on Long Island, which also served as the temporary United Nations headquarters from 1946 to 1952. I had no idea about that myself either. I had no idea that on Long Island, the United Nations was there for 6 years. Oh, no, more than, and into the 1980s. But it was, I guess it was only at Lake Success from 46 to 52, and then I think it moved. On move-in day, the Security Council discussed the Balkans, and following that moment, 8,265 more meetings would occur in Lake Success. So in the few years that it was there, they had over 8,000 meetings. So you can't even say that, we really didn't use it. Sperry regained complete control of its headquarters at 2 p.m. on March 18th, 1951. Until the company closed in 1986, it would produce electronics and equipment for the American people. The building it once occupied alongside the United Nations, specifically the Security Council, is now a condominium and office center. So I just found that really interesting that a dude who worked for this place was also associated with the United Nations at one point, and he was a Nazi spy. I don't know. That was just weird. After a lengthy investigation following FBI agents intercepting a Nazi radio transmission coming from Centerport, which is Long Island, a network of more than 30 Nazi spies was discovered woven into the fabric of New York metropolitan area. Many members of the ring had a membership or connections to the pro-Nazi German-American Bund, what I was just talking about in Yaphank, which had one of its headquarters in Yaphank. The spy network, referred to as the Dukesne Ring, was organized by Fritz, with that same last name, I'm not even trying to say it, a German Bund member and trained Nazi spy who worked directly with the Gestapo. Roeder, an active participant in that, had the code name CARR, CAR. The conspirators would transmit 300 messages and receive 200 messages from Long Island to Hamburg, Germany, via shortwave radio. American double agent William Sebald provided statements to the FBI that he was given $22,000 within 2 years from the Nazi Germany to pay the active members in that network. So, like, they're even paying the people. Just like the dozen of others involved, Rhoda received multiple payments of $300. Rhoda worked directly with the Japanese agent Lieutenant Commander Takeo Izima, who served Japanese and Nazi German interests. Rhoda provided detailed plans for the wiring system for the fighter planes in return for the payments. The other spies within the network had employment in New York City shipyards, Ford Motor Company, Chrysler Motor Company, New York-based American Gas and Electric Company, and Westinghouse Electric Company. The FBI dismantled the ring swiftly with minor damage and intelligent leaks to the Nazis.
What's funny about that Ford connection, so Ford had his plants over in Germany. And after the war, he sued the American government to get reimbursement for the plants that they blew up over in Germany that were providing the enemy with their vehicles. And he won. He won that lawsuit. So again, like, this is an industrial network. It's not just spying. What they were doing was they were working with their allies in the United States. They just didn't go after the co-conspirators. It's like Ghislaine Maxwell. She was trafficking, children to nobody, apparently.
There's even like a shipping thing here, and then I'll wrap it up here, and then we'll go into Fort Terry. Finally, sorry. But discovered through agents' investigations of property was a connection to Nazi-aligned companies in New York City that directly participated in the Nazi cause or daily operations of the spy rings. One regular contact in the network of Nazi spies was Elmer Carlton, owner of Remmel Carlton Shipping Company of Manhattan. His company was under suspicion of Nazi activities due to the Yaphank German Bund using it to receive goods from Nazi Germany. New York City-based Remy & Company, which advertised itself as a chemical shipping company, was a front for various intercepting Nazi spy networks. But the most important intelligence gathered was how the Nazi spy ring operated and what intelligence they were targeting. But so, I mean, that even shows you right there. I mean, you got some shipping company in Manhattan that's like, a lot of stuff with companies, bullshit. I sometimes wonder, like, for real, I think this may sound silly to some people, but I think like a lot of the stuff that we see is almost like Ocean's 11, when they thought that they saw the cops coming in and, getting the robbers. Like, a lot of shit that we just look at and our eyes see and just take as real, really, I think is like, not. We see like a company. Yeah, well, no, you see a company truck go down the road. It looks beat up. You think it's whatever. Not saying it's like the feds. I don't want people thinking that it's the feds listening to our conversations. But, like, it could be anything. But, you know what I'm saying? It could be some, like, Nazis. They be sex trafficking. You have no idea. Just because it has, like, a company name written on the side of it, people just look at it as being harmless.
It's so simple to be fooled by a uniform.
Yeah, yes, exactly, man. You just have to play the part, and nobody will think anything of it. I mean, you see this shit constantly in, like, stupid movies like The Italian Job and shit like that. People just dressing up as, like, a normal, everyday cable guy. If you had the damn money to go get the outfit and you had a van and you could throw a sticker on there, yeah, you would fool people. They would think you're actually doing that. As silly as it is and as, dumb as it is because it's in TVs or movies, if you think about it, if you did that, nobody would think anything of it. So, I mean, who knows, You see these companies out there, and who knows what the hell they're really doing or, what's going on. Countless times when I've covered stuff on the Occult Rejects, you will see somebody in a secret society's address or the secret society itself linked to like 10 other addresses or 10 other companies at the same address.
Right.
What the hell do you think's going on, man?
The Nazi SS also that was based on America's Secret Service. So they just took the SS from Secret Service and they just translated that into German words. And that's what the Nazi SS is. So it's the same idea. Basically, these institutions that you're seeing as spy networks, they just dismantled them because Hitler lost support of America. But if we had allied with the British, or if we'd allied with the Germans against the British, which was a possibility, it was a real possibility. There was a lot of industrialists on the side of the Germans. You'd be seeing the same articles talking about smashing British colonialism, because they had the same amount of, spies and propagandists all over the United States, especially in New York. So they'd be saying, oh, there was a spy network. Well, yeah, it wasn't a spy network until after you called it a spy network. These were just, the people doing the work of building this new German-American alliance. That's what they thought. It's never a spy network until it's labeled as such. It goes back to the idea of, slap a sticker on the side of the truck. Everybody will take it to be that, Well,
speaking of companies, who's to say that that's not true of the pharmaceutical companies now? Of science field in general, medical universities.
It's all military. That's who funded it. That's who's pushing it. And you hear the people in England talking about how they're being pushed out of the NHS because they don't believe in the American ideals that are flooding over into England. It's like, well, it's the same thing. Like our system of insurance propagation and everything else is now, and privatization of the NHS, it's completely destroying the NHS over there. And it's absolutely meant to, because they're trying to suck out as much wealth from as many different places as possible. Same
Agreed.
Situation.
Yeah.
All right. Before I move on, I was going to go into Fort Terry. Now I know you had stuff on that too as well, Lisa.
In terms of Fort Terry, the little blip that I had about Fort Terry was just that it was an artillery area, and then in the early 1900s, and then it just got transitioned over to a military bioweapons, and that was during the time when they brought in Eric Traub. And one of the reasons that they brought him in was for his work on foot and mouth disease and Newcastle disease, which incidentally, it's funny because I believe they brought him over in the 50s, and somewhere around the same time you saw outbreaks of foot and mouth, Newcastle. I think there was other ones kind of in other areas that had never had an outbreak or had those viruses ever in their, history. So it was just interesting that they had that. And then with foot and mouth disease, I thought that was interesting in that it was the first disease to have the first genetically engineered vaccine in 1981. And that came out of Plum Island, or the Plum Island Animal Disease Center. But that's all from Fort Terry. Fort Terry was converted over into Building 257, and then they rebuilt another one in Building 101, and where most of the deadliest pathogens known to livestock were experimented with.
Yeah, pretty much condensed everything that I already had. But I mean, I'll read, get some specific dates. Fort Terry was a coastal fortification on Plum Island, a small island just off Orient Point, New York, United States. The strategic position afforded it a commanding view over the Atlantic entrance to the commercially vital Long Island Sound. It was established in 1897 and used intermittently through the end of World War II. In 1952, it became a military, animal, and biological warfare research facility, moving to civilian control in 1954 as the Plum Island Animal Disease Center. Despite the new civilian control, the biological warfare mission continued until 1969, when the U.S. officially ended offensive biological warfare research. The original anti-animal biological warfare research mission at Fort Terry was to establish and pursue a program of research and development of certain anti-animal biological warfare agents. The first agent that was a candidate for development was foot and mouth disease, like you said. Besides foot and mouth disease, 5 other top secret biological warfare projects were commissioned on Plum Island. The other 4 programs researched included Rift Valley fever, rinderpest, African swine fever, and a slew of miscellaneous exotic animal diseases. Shortly before they hand over the facility to the Department of Agriculture in 1954, Fort Terry's mission was altered. The number of pathogens studied were reduced to 2, rinderpest and foot and mouth disease, and the mission was changed to defensive research of those 2 diseases. So that's pretty much, I'll just leave it there. I think everything else is the same.
Is there really any way of determining what is a defensive disease and an offensive disease when both of the 2 requires the same protocols to make?
That's what I'm saying. No. Come on. What's the difference between defensive and offensive?
Semantics.
Yeah.
It makes them feel better. Yeah. Yeah. And even like some of the literature about like Eric Traub wasn't Nazi, wasn't part of Siegfried. The paper that came out and said about that was out of Scientific American, and Scientific American is known to be owned by a German company, and the actual guy who started it was part of the Nazi Party. So it's interesting that also is kind of playing into that as well.
But there is a connection with Eric going there, correct? You said?
Yes.
I think it's funny that all of our scientific words come from Latin and all of our psychological words come from Greek, right? And then after World War II, all of our scientific knowledge comes from Germany, all of the Operation Paperclip scientists. So I think it's sort of like this continuation of the cycle of how things are done. We just adopt everything from one culture that we like. We adopt everything from another culture that we like. And it's done from the top down. So we think it's actually happening organically. It's not. They choose this vernacular. They choose what they're going to focus on. And now we're basically inside of this Nazi-washed scientific paradigm, and it shouldn't be any surprise that we've got COVID.
Absolutely. Well, and then kind of what all this is kind of came about was that, but before COVID, before 2020 in 2019, there were legislators wanting to question if DoD had any involvement in weaponizing Lyme disease. I think it was HR 4350, and it was an amendment to the House of Representatives to look into this and investigate it. And they wanted to know if so, then what? Like, what were they using it for, and how were they using it? And they wanted further investigation if they found that there was involvement or money funneled in that area. And then I believe also in 2002, whenever American forces went into Afghanistan, they found like a dossier in Kabul saying that Plum Island was on the list for, I guess looking into or potential target as well.
Not to put you on the spot, Lisa, but I think that I showed that there was a Nazi presence in Long Island before and after World War II. We had a Nazi scientist come over to Plum Island after World War II. And in your opinion, with the stuff that you've seen with Lyme disease, what do you think might have actually have gone on?
I think that because they were already tinkering with ticks, because they were already tinkering with rickettsials, different types of pathogens within fleas and ticks, it is not out of the realm possibility that they were already doing this or weaponizing it. I think this was the beginning of gain of function. I think this was the precursor to taking benign, regular, run-of-the-mill diseases that are not that big of a deal, like the common cold, and then basically pumping them up and weaponizing them and then using them for something. I don't know if it's for the purpose of destroying a population, or is it to sicken a population and then already have the cure in the weights, kind of like the ultimate racketeering situation. But the other thing is that Eric Traub was part of the cancer research program in Nazi Germany. And so I wonder how much of this is the Reich came over and we're still going to play a hand in destroying Europe and the US in a subtle way. So I think with Lyme disease, it's odd that it comes on the surface out of nowhere, and then now you can't get rid of it. And then you have government officials and the medical profession just completely ignoring it. Again, how is it we're spending all this money on stuff, but nobody's spending any money on that? And it seems like something that could be easily solved if you paid enough attention to it in a benevolent way.
Correct me if I'm wrong,
take.
but wasn't there something also where you're saying that, like, something with Lyme, it would also weaken your immune system or make other things?
Yes. Actually, whenever you are compromised in that you basically are fighting off a disease, you already become a target for other diseases. And in a couple of papers that I've read where patients are infected with Lyme disease, they are also infected with subsequent other diseases such as mycobacteriums. And mycobacteriums, you see that with tuberculosis, you see that with Crohn's disease, and it's kind of like a bacterial fungal type situation. And mycobacterium is, it's kind of insidious in that it acts like HIV, in that it turns off your immune system. So that if you have an infection with a mycobacterium, your immune system basically goes offline from overstimulation, so that any other pathogen that comes on board, such as a common cold, you could potentially die from it because you didn't mount a proper immune response to fight it off. So if you're seeing Lyme disease and you're seeing coupling with another pathogen, such as a mycobacterium, that could also be why you're seeing the long-term effects of Lyme, or why you're seeing Lyme being so detrimental, if it's not being cured the way they say with antibiotics.
Well, I think in terms of what their intentions are, I think the Nazis were really big into population control. Mm-hmm. And they had a different methodology of carrying that out over in Germany based off of ethnicity. But what happened in America is they changed their focus of population control over to how they can basically reduce the numbers as silently as possible, right? So it was a different form of eugenics. So I don't think it would be that much of a stretch for a Nazi scientist to change his focus from cleansing all of the unfavored races, as they would put it, to, well, let's reduce the population in such a way as to make it as silent as possible. Sort of the same idea. The strong would be the people who are not susceptible to these viruses and these bacterium that they're just loading up the environment with. Not even to mention the parasites that never get any attention, but also you've got chemicals that are weakening you, and so the people with the strongest resolve to keep away from that stuff will end up prospering, and the people who don't end up dying. So you've got more of a social Darwinism instead of just a racial Darwinism. And that's something that I think he would probably go along with.
Yeah. Agreed. And going back to the whole what you said about the eugenics, the headquarters was there in Long Island. I believe it was Cold Harbor where they set up. And I believe some of the correspondences that they looked with Eric had correspondences in with some of the eugenic scientists. Now, in a collaborative sense, I don't know. But
all right. Well, it's about that time. I think we can leave it there. Plus, Headless does have prior things to do. So, that was. I just thought that was really just interesting and weird history, I guess, about Long Island, Lyme disease, the questionable things about that, Nazis here, Nazis coming to Long Island and working at places dealing with stuff like this. Just very weird, very weird. Thank you again, Headless. I think at the beginning, because of technical difficulties, we didn't get to actually hear you plug yourself. So let everybody know who you are, please.
I'm the Headless Giant. I've got my own podcast. You can look it up on Spotify, and definitely check that out. Also, I've got a space going on right now. It's The Future is Ancient. We're going to be talking about ancients at war. It's something that doesn't get talked a lot about, what the ancients thought about war and how they engaged in it and how that relates to what's going on today. There's a lot of eugenics going on back in the ancient world as well. And that a lot of people think that that's a recent phenomenon, but it's been going on for thousands and thousands of years. War is just a human sacrifice ritual, really. And so all of this stuff we see at Plum Island is very closely related to that. You can find me on Twitter. Just look up at Headless Giant Podcasts, and I will be there. Thank you for having me on.
Of course. No, thank you, as usual. And Lisa, thank you very, very much. Again, you have nothing to plug, but I appreciate all the work that you put into it. Yes. And thank you, everybody, for jumping in on the chat and in on the live. Unfortunately, I really can't man the chat or really pay much mind to it once I have to start getting into the show, but I do appreciate everybody jumping on and checking this live out. And that is the end of another Occult Rejects episode. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.